Douglas Legg. Douglas Legg was the grandson of the Melvin family that owned the Santanoni estate, now known as the Santanoni Preserve. Dougie, as he was known, was a keen hiker despite his young age. On Saturday afternoon, July 10, 1971, Dougie and his uncle set out on a hike around the Santanoni property. Due to the risk of poison ivy in the area, Dougie's uncle sent him back to the lodge, which was only half a mile away, to change from shorts into pants. Dougie was seen by his older brother and cousin about 50 to 60 yards from the main lodge building. He never met back with his uncle, and he was never seen from or heard from again. That evening, as the temperature dropped, the family called the state police and locals from the town. They found out that Dougie had not arrived at the lodge as his pants were still in the lodge untouched. They searched for him throughout the night in the local area, including Newcomb Lake. The next day, a formal search was started by the forest rangers using dogs and planes equipped with heat-detecting infrared FLIR. The wilderness terrain filled with swamps, bogs, and dense forest hampered the search and rescue efforts. Soon, a bloodhound found a scent, but it was lost at the edge of a swampy pond, which was subsequently drained, but nothing was found. On the 5th day of the search, sneaker tracks were found about 2 miles away at Ward Pond, but the heavy rain in previous days had washed away any scent or shoe prints. All search efforts were unsuccessful, and the New York State Police called off the search after 6 weeks. In 1993, a woman claimed that a boy fitting Dougie's description had been abducted and killed by one of her relatives. She said his body was dumped into a lake in Lewis County. However, when the authorities searched the dry lake bed, they found nothing. It was later found that the woman was a psychiatric patient suffering from false memory syndrome. Then, around the same time, a man came forward and reported that he saw skeletal remains in 1973, which he believed to be human. He and a friend were hunting and became separated as he chased a deer leading to a 21-acre island in Newcomb Lake, which was approximately half a mile from the lodge. At the time, he wasn't aware of Dougie's disappearance, so he did not report it to the police. The man traveled from his home in Montana to show investigators the area where he found the remains. But unfortunately, after extensive search, they could not find anything. It is still unknown if Dougie simply wandered off and was lost, succumbing to the elements, or if foul play was involved. He remains missing to this day. Barbara Bolick. On July 18, 2007, Barbara Bolick, a 55-year-old woman from Corvallis, Montana, went on a hiking trip in Beetroot Mountains with Jim Rammaker, a friend who was visiting from California. Barbara had been on the Bear Overlook Trail many times before and knew the area well. She was an experienced hiker and physically fit. Both of them were heading toward Bear Creek Overlook when Jim stopped to look at a scenic view. Barbara had been about 6 to 9 meters behind him at the time, but when Jim turned around to look behind him after a mere minute, Barbara was nowhere to be seen. After authorities were notified, an extensive search of the area turned up no trace of Barbara. She was carrying a black day pack at the time of her disappearance. It contained a .357 Magnum pistol. Jim said that on that day, he and Barbara spoke to 2 young men who were also on the trail. Other witnesses confirmed that the 2 young men were on the trail. But despite police offering a $10,000 reward to identify these 2 men, the potential witnesses have yet to be located. The 2 men were in their early 20s, accompanied by a black mixed breed dog with floppy ears and white markings. One of them is described as dark-skinned with black hair, and the other had a medium complexion and reddish hair. Both men were clean-cut and they each had an athletic build. They may have been driving a light-colored older model Chevrolet S10 SUV with Missoula County, Montana license plates. The men are not considered a suspect in Bolick's disappearance, but investigators would like to question them. Pollock is not believed to have left on her own accord, because she left behind all her belongings, including her dog, cat, identification and passport. Pollock's husband stated that she was afraid of heights and would not have gone near the edge of precipice or left the trail. Although Jim Rammaker had been the last person to see her, police have never found any reason to suspect he had done anything to her. Her case remains unsolved. Jeffrey Zoltowski. Jeffrey Zoltowski was a student at Wayne State University in Michigan. In March 1993, he was hiking in Wailua Valley in Hawaii. While on the hike, he flagged down a helicopter from the Department of Land and Natural Resources. He believed he wouldn't make it back home on his own as his feet were severely blistered and bleeding, and the nearest civilization was 14 miles away. He asked the pilot for a ride in the helicopter. The pilot refused to fly Jeffrey out of the area as he claimed it was not a life-threatening situation. Pilot said he could charter a plane for $650, but Jeffrey refused because he could not afford it. The pilot did, however, offer to lighten his load and took his 60-pound backpack to the DLNR service yard on Molokai, where he could pick it up. Jeffrey never claimed his possessions and has not been seen since. His backpack sat unclaimed in the DLNR office for 41 days before he was reported missing. An extensive search was carried out with volunteers and rangers, but no trace of him was ever found. On July 28, 2001, 8 years after his disappearance, a woman recounted a possible sighting of Jeffrey begging near a homeless shelter in Honolulu. The woman reported that the man called himself Sam or Samuel and panhandled for money from vehicles stopped in the traffic. He had a heavy facial scarring, he limped, and his speech was slurred, indications that he may have suffered a severe head injury in the past. It has not been confirmed that the individual was in fact Jeffrey. Investigators searched for the man but came up empty-handed. The area where he was seen is near a homeless shelter run by the Institute of Human Services, but no one at the shelter recognized Jeffrey's picture. He remains missing to this day. Pradhdeep Srawn. Pradhdeep Srawn was a 25-year-old Canadian studying law at Bond University in Australia. In April of 2013, Pradhdeep returned to Canada to visit his family and friends, then came back to Australia in May the same year to complete his degree. Before he left Canada, he told his family he planned to visit the Blue Mountains and Mount Kosciuszko before returning to the university. On the 13th of May, Pradhdeep hired a van from Juicy Rental Company and spent the night in the van near a convenience store in Jindabyne. He had planned the next day to hike Mount Kosciuszko. He had used his laptop to plot out a trek using Google Maps and Wikipedia. The next day, he parked his rental van at Charlotte Pass and set out on his way to Main Range Trail. He had planned on completing a 9-hour hike along the Main Range walking track bound for Mount Kosciuszko via Carruthers Peak and Mount Townsend. He was not known to be carrying a map, compass, GPS, tent, or cold weather clothing. However, he was believed to be carrying some food and a mobile phone. He has not been seen or heard from since. On the day he disappeared, the weather in the morning was fine and sunny, but around afternoon, the temperature dramatically dropped and a blizzard had set in. On the 15th and 16th of May, the Juicy Rental Company attempted to contact Pradhdeep to tell him he was overdue on returning the van, but both times they were unable to get an answer. It wouldn't be until 4 days later that a staff member noticed Pradhdeep's car was still in the Charlotte Pass, and it wouldn't be until another 2 days that police were able to trace Pradhdeep's identity via the Juicy Rental Company. By now, 30 millimeters of rain and snow had already fallen. On 19th of May, the police began a small search with 2 National Park and Wildlife Service rangers searching around Seaman's Hut and Mount Kosciuszko. Police tried to trace the signal from Pradeep's phone, but were unable to do so due to the phone being off the Vodafone grid for 3 days. The next day, an extensive police search began, but were hindered by treacherous weather conditions. Helicopters equipped with infrared sensors were called in to assist in the search, as well as sniffer dogs, but neither could locate Pradhdeep. A report soon came in that some employees doing maintenance work at Opera House Hut heard what they believed to be a human voice crying out. They attempted to trace the source and called back to the voice, but were unable to find the source. A skier in an area known as Little Austria, which is in the same area, also believed he heard a voice coming from the same direction at around the same time. The area was extensively searched, but no trace of him was ever found. Volunteers and officers searched for him for the next 4 weeks, but he would never be found. One of the searchers said that he believes Pradhdeep had disappeared in Western Fall, a steep area amongst bushes, rocks and deep creeks. He came to the conclusion after a water bottle was discovered and a search and rescue dog indicated that he was there. Moreover, Pradhdeep's mobile phone last pinged around the same area before going completely silent. However, despite number of searches of the area, nothing ever panned out. In 2015, Pradhdeep was declared dead following a coroner's inquest into his disappearance, stating that it is most likely that he succumbed to hypothermia caused by exposure to very low temperatures, wind and snow. Pradheep's family has spent over $400,000 on private searches and refuse to believe he is dead. Keith Reinhard. In 1988, 49-year-old Keith Reinhard was a sports writer for the Daily Herald in Chicago, but he decided to take a leave absence for a unique outing. He wanted to exercise more, lose his fear of heights, write a novel, and open an antique shop. He moved to Silver Plume, Colorado, a small mining village near the Rocky Mountains. He settled in and found a vacant shop right next to the cafe on Main Street that he leased in order to sell antiques and matted photographs. He had planned to permanently relocate himself and his wife to Silver Plume if his business would be a success. He soon learned that the building his antique store was in used to be a bookstore owned by a man named Tom Young, who had vanished a year earlier with his dog. Tom had told people he was taking a vacation to Europe. 3 weeks went by before anyone became suspicious about his absence. Keith considered this to be an ideal story to tell and began to research Tom Young. Eventually, Keith decided to base his novel on Tom Young. When he began to write, he created a character named Guy Gypsum, who was a composite of himself and Tom. On 31st of July 1988, 10 months after Tom vanished, 2 hunters found the remains of Tom and his dog in the mountains near Silver Plume. Not far away was a backpack and a pistol. Both had died with a gunshot wound to the head. In subsequent investigation, police found out that Tom had purchased a gun approximately 4 days before he was last known to be in Silver Plume. Authorities ruled his death a suicide. 1 week after Tom's body was found, Keith walked through Silver Plume telling everyone that he would be climbing the top of Pendleton Mountain. Keith was last seen walking toward the Pendleton Mountain at 4:30 p.m. with no supplies, far too late in the day to begin a difficult 6-hour hike. This would be the last time he was ever seen again. When Keith didn't return the next day, an extensive search began involving trained dogs, helicopters, and over 100 people. After 1 week, authorities found nothing. They finally called off the search on 12th of August 1989 when sadly one of the searchers crashed his plane during the efforts and was killed. His friends searched his business and found a newspaper next to his computer, mentioning the discovery of Tom's remains. In his computer, they found the following words: Guy Gypsum changed into some hiking boots and donned a heavy flannel shirt. He understood it all now and his motivation. Guy closed the door, then walked off towards the lush, shadowless Colorado forest above. Some suggested that this meant he was going to go off and commit suicide. However, his family does not believe that he would have done this. Some Silver Plume residents speculated that Keith and Young's case were related, and both men were in fact murdered, but authorities could not find any evidence to support this. Some of Keith's friends recalled that he was fascinated with the idea of visiting West Virginia. Also, the night before he vanished, he had attended a party where he had talked to a woman named either Greta or Gretchen, who was from Denver. Investigators located the woman named Greta or Gretchen and questioned her about the case. However, she had no information about Keith's disappearance. Although many rumors have circulated about Keith's disappearance, no evidence has surfaced to support any of them, and his case remains unsolved.